Like it's people writing to their MPs and calling their MPs
Yeah.
and putting pressure on the government and saying not in our name.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't assume every politician actually gives a shit too, which is sad. It's really sad. But sometimes that pressure works because there are people in power, unfortunately, who are more concerned about the politics of issues than the actual like morality of them. So,
Well, and
um,
every MP has to get reelected. If they want to keep their job, they all have to get reelected. They all have to go
exactly.
back to Canadians at some point and say,
Yeah. And that's how you
yeah.
can put the fear of God into them, people. Hello, I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. Welcome to Bubble Pop, the show where we talk about some of the biggest headlines and juicy news tidbits so you don't have to doom scroll. Today, I am really excited to be sitting down remotely with NDP MP Heather McPherson. There is a lot of political news happening this week, and we will touch on that. But that's not the main reason I wanted to have Heather on this week. Yesterday, Heather held one of the most important press conferences I've seen in my almost decade-long career as a political journalist. She announced a motion to pressure the government to act on the genocide in Gaza. But from her, that's not necessarily new. She has been pressing the government to sanction Israel, to implement a two-way arms embargo, and to officially recognize a Palestinian state for some time now. And she has been continually let down by half measures and inaction. But what she did on Wednesday that was so striking was she took her microphone and she handed it to healthcare workers who have been in Gaza. Canadian healthcare workers can go where Canadian journalists can't. Into Gaza. That makes their testimony vital for cutting through lies and propaganda and exposing horrific realities. And that is exactly what they did in Wednesday's press conference.
When the ceasefire was broken on March 18th, my first patient was a young man, 19 years old, his leg torn from his body at the level of his hip. It is one of the worst limb injuries I have seen in my entire career, but yet I saw two more patients with almost identical injuries in the 4 weeks that followed, and so many more injuries that were just as devastating. Healthcare workers in Gaza feel particularly vulnerable. More than 14,000 have been killed in the last year and a half. Two of my physician friends were killed in hospitals where they worked. Two more were abducted from hospitals and are still held in Israeli prisons. This spring, I treated a pharmacist who was in his pharmacy when it was bombed by Israeli forces. He must have been holding a pen when he was attacked. The ink had spattered all over his hand. I still don't know if he lived. I was in Gaza when Nasser Hospital Surgical Department was attacked in March, and when Al Ahli Emergency Room was attacked in April. And we looked at each other and we wondered, would our hospital be next? But the staff kept coming to work because they had no other safe place to go, although they were terrified, and they told me this, that they might be killed without their families, or their families might be killed without them. I was home already on May 13th, when my hospital, the European Gaza Hospital, was attacked with numerous Israeli airstrikes, which put the hospital out of service, killed and injured around 60 people. That was a full functioning hospital with patients, families, visitors, doctors, medical students who came every day to study, residents who came to work to treat patients and to continue to study and advance in their exams. As a surgeon, I cannot treat a genocide. As doctors, we cannot stop a famine. So we demand that the Canadian government take meaningful action to enact a ceasefire, enforce a complete two-way arms embargo, prosecute attacks on healthcare, including investigating Canadians who have served in the Israeli forces for potential involvement in those and other war crimes, to end the siege and deliver aid to Gaza, and to uphold the Genocide Convention.
To talk about this press conference and the political push to try to get the government to act on this genocide, I am so excited to welcome NDP MP Heather McPherson on the show. Heather, welcome to Bubble Pop.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting. It's exciting
Thank
to
you
be
so
on
much
with you.
for being here. Oh, I'm excited to have you here. So, especially because, Parliament has just returned, and you have immediately taken steps to pressure the government to act on the genocide in Gaza.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit, maybe just taking a bit of a step back, about the moment that you recognized not only the power you have, but the necessity of using your political power to help address this issue?
Yeah, I mean, for me, we're all watching these horrific images, come across our social media. We are all seeing what is happening in Gaza right now. There isn't anyone who can say they aren't seeing starving children and absolutely decimated families and hospitals being bombed and all of these horrendous things. And it was really early on when as a parliamentarian, I mean, I come from this work. I worked in international development before I came to politics, but it was really early on that I realized that, you know, we always talk about World War II and we always talk about how was that able to happen? How is it able to happen that regular people didn't do what they could? And I said to myself, like, I'm not going to look in the mirror and think that I didn't try to use my voice in whatever way I could to ensure that innocent people were protected. Like I have to feel in my heart like I've done what I can for my own soul, for my own
Yeah.
my own well-being. Um, and yeah, I'm a member of the New Democratic Party. We're not the biggest party in the House of Commons, but each member of Parliament has the ability to raise their voice and to raise issues. And for me, this is such a important issue of our time, such an important moment for us to show bravery and to show that we really stand by the beliefs of human rights matter for everyone. The idea that international law is there for a reason, that innocent lives, regardless of whether they are brown lives or white lives, matter equally. These are fundamental things that I believe, that I think Canadians believe, and so if that's the case, we have to fight for them.
And it's it's an issue that I think that when you actually look at it, it's quite easy to have moral clarity on. But that hasn't been the case for everyone in power, everyone with the power to write about it, with the power to speak about this. I I'm wondering if there were any moments where you received a kind of pushback to this that surprised you or particularly disappointed you.
What surprises me and makes me upset is that there aren't more members of parliament from all parties talking about this right now. What Netanyahu is doing is systematically breaking every international law. The targeting of civilians, like all of the things, the use of food as a weapon of war, the starvation of a population, all of these things that Netanyahu is so deliberately doing, um, goes against, you know, I mean, for me, super frustrating. Canada was one of the architects of the international justice system. The International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court. That was Lloyd Axworthy who did that work, who got that system in place. We can't even get the conservatives to agree to say that they would adhere to any decision coming out of the criminal court. Like for me, that's the thing that gets me is like, where are these guys? How do folks think that you can have genocide experts around the world saying that what is happening is a genocide, and and we have parliamentarians that say, well, it's no big deal. It's unbelievable to me. We're
Yeah.
signatories to the Genocide Convention. We have a moral obligation and a legal obligation to do things.
Yeah. Hearing those stories yesterday, from the healthcare workers that you handed the microphone to, and knowing that the government has only started taking steps like threatening sanctions and has left loopholes, gaping loopholes in any attempt towards an arms embargo. Like, how does that feel?
I mean, March 18th last year was one of the hardest days for me of being a
Yeah.
parliamentarian, because it was the day that the New Democrats brought forward an opposition day. So it was the very first time in the history of our country that we have talked about, Palestinian human rights, peace in the Middle East, the Palestinian right to self-determination, all of those things. That was the first time we'd ever spoken about that in the House of Commons. And we made a deal with the Liberals because, I spoke to community members that day. I spoke to folks that said, listen, like, they're not going to pass the full thing. This is what we want, but they're not going to pass that. Let's get what we can. Let's get the arms embargo. Let's get them to do these things. And, Melanie Joly and Justin Trudeau stood up in the House of Commons and said that they were going to do those things, and then they didn't. So for all of us, like, what a feeling of betrayal. And this isn't asking them to, to figure out a way to bring us the moon. This is asking them to stop selling weapons to a country that is using those weapons against innocent civilians. This is literally asking them to follow Canadian law. Like, the Arms Trade Treaty is the law of Canada. The Genocide Convention we are signatories to, that is the law. So we're literally just asking our government to adhere to the laws. and somebody pointed out yesterday, like, the Liberals have on their website, like, the values of Canadians, and like, we believe in human rights and protecting others, and we the whole Canadian identity. But when push comes to shove, that's not what they're doing. That's not how they're acting. We still have arms that are going to Israel. We still have they have not done anything except write a letter. And I will also point out, they're never willing to write a letter on their own. They'll only write a letter when they get some coverage from friends. But so basically what we're at right now is 19 months into this genocide. Tens of thousands of Palestinian children at the risk of starvation. Canadian testimony from medical professionals talking about limbs being blown off bodies during a ceasefire. And so now we're saying, we're thinking about maybe sanctioning you, maybe if things don't get better, but we're not going to tell you when they have to get better by. We're not going to give you any sort of constraints on that. Just like a very stern, I hope you take this as a stern finger wagging.
It's actually abhorrent. I know
And
that this
listen,
is probably,
honestly, like, sorry to interrupt, but like,
no.
Canadians, like, millions of Canadians have written to me. Like, I'm not the minister. Imagine what the minister is receiving from Canadians. And these are not Canadians
Yeah.
that are Palestinian Canadian or Jewish Canadian or Israeli Canadian or Arab Canadian. These are Canadian folks that are watching what this government is doing and saying, stop it. This is not right. This is the wrong thing to be doing. And I don't want my government doing that. And yet, here we are.
I know you're maybe the wrong person to ask this question to, because it's really for Melanie Joly, it's for, Anita Anand, it's for all of these people who are the ones doing that. But you've worked as a parliamentarian, like, you currently are a sitting MP. Why? Why do you think they're not acting?
I don't know. I think there's probably some ideological things happening. I think there's probably like, for example, for probably more than a decade, the New Democrats have been calling on the Liberals to stop selling arms to Saudi Arabia because they've been using them against civilians in Yemen. It's lucrative. There's a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of powerful people that like selling weapons. There's a lot of money to be made in pain and suffering for innocent people. So I think there's some of that. But yeah, I think realistically, it's frankly just a lack of moral courage. Like, there are things that they could do. I think I mentioned this in the press conference yesterday, but there are things that they could do that require no parliamentary oversight at all. Like, there is nothing they need to come to Parliament with. There's nothing stopping them from taking very concrete steps, and they're not choosing to do it.
Yeah.
And they're telling Canadians that they're interested in doing it. They did a study. So for example, last Parliament, the Liberals brought forward a study on recognizing the state of Palestine in the Foreign Affairs Committee. And it was sort of a way to say, like, well, we're going into an election, but let's look like we're moving on some of this stuff. And frankly, nothing came of it. There was no report that came out of it. And there doesn't need to be, because Minister Anand could get up and recognize the state of Palestine today. I mean, it's a conversation that's happening around the world. Macron in France is talking about recognizing the state of Palestine. He's saying that in June this is a step that he's considering taking. In Canada, those conversations are happening around the world, but not in Canada, not for us.
Yeah. I want to ask you about what you have the power to do, because I know it's tough with such a small caucus, but as you noted
Mm-hmm.
yesterday, you guys do have the balance of power. I mean, admittedly, the Liberals can choose their dancing partners, but you are a potential partner, right? I know you put a motion on the order paper yesterday, but as you noted, those aren't binding and they won't necessarily come up. You've got the lottery system and everything first. But what, for the people listening who maybe don't understand the tools in your toolbox, what are the concrete steps that you, as an NDP MP in the NDP caucus, can and are taking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we are limited. We're not the government, and
Yeah.
and we aren't even a recognized party right now. So that does limit what we can do. That said, my job has always been to amplify the voices of the folks that are doing the real work. Yesterday I stood with a whole bunch of doctors who have worked in Gaza, who have seen on the ground what is happening. I mean, what I can do is provide them with the opportunity to share those stories, because they're the ones doing the real work. They're the ones that are actually um, risking their lives to help people in Gaza. So I can do that. I can amplify. I have other tools I can use. For example, it is the first motion for this parliament. So M1 is on recognizing the state of Palestine. Now, I will say, like, private members' business is tricky. Sometimes it doesn't come up. Sometimes you don't get the lottery number. Sometimes it's not going to pass anyway. But it is a tool to raise the awareness of the issue. We've had some great success with private members' business. Like, I was able to get a bill stopping coal mining in the Rocky Mountains, to get Minister Wilkinson at the time to put it into practice. Like, we use these things to put pressure on the government. We use these tools to say to the government, like, we're not going to be silent on these things, and you're going to have to answer these questions. We still have questions in question period. I'm going to be grilling the government on what it means when you send a finger wagging letter. Like, what's the deadline? When does that come into play? Like, what does that actually mean? Or was it actually just a toothless thing that you were trying to kick the ball down the field? We've got those tools. I'm going to be writing to Minister Anand, and I'm going to be writing to Prime Minister Carney to ask why it is the Canadian medical professionals are being denied entry to Gaza by the Israeli government, when they are going in to try to provide life-saving support. We need to talk to our new Minister of International Development to find out why humanitarian aid is not getting into Gaza, so that people get the food and the medicine and the fuel that they require. So we have some of those tools that we can use, and frankly, I'll continue to use all of them. Media is another one. Like, the fact that you and I are having this conversation, Rachel, is so important. Folks listen to the things that you have to say, and media has not been particularly great on covering this issue. I will say that the important role that media plays is key, but social media is also playing a really important role within this genocide. This is the first genocide in the history of humanity that has been live streamed. There is nowhere to hide. There is no one that can say they didn't know this was happening, because it is all out there right now. So, I mean, those are a few of the tools. And frankly, like, I like to be collaborative with my colleagues. So if Minister Anand wants to sit down and talk about a strategy to make these things happen, if she wants to talk about a timeline on how we can make some progress on some of this stuff, I'm happy to work with her. I'm not interested in just scoring political points. Like, what we want to do is see Canada take concrete steps that will help end this genocide.
That's great to hear, because unfortunately it's something that's often missing in parliamentary debates. Is sometimes, you think someone's caring about an issue, but then you scratch the surface and realize that it's they're not actually as interested in a solution as they are about being seen speaking about the problem. But
Yeah.
I wanted to drill down a little more on, you kind of took the words out of my mouth in a lot of ways on the roles that we play in bringing attention to issues like this. I mean, one thing that really has struck me over the years that I've reported on Parliament Hill is the sort of ecosystem that it takes to affect change on an issue, right? Like opposition MPs can bring up an issue, they can put it on the order paper, they can hold press conferences. But if the media doesn't pick it up, the government doesn't feel the same pressure to they don't feel that pressure to the same degree because fewer people
Mhm.
hear about these steps being taken. So they don't necessarily know, like, oh, this is what we can throw our support behind. This is what we can pressure the government on. Obviously, as you mentioned, social media can help with that in a major way. So you don't necessarily need the mainstream media to pick up on a story for it to go viral. But that being said, I think that there's certainly a distinction, a difference between the issues that get raised in the House, if they're coming from social media versus if they're being talked about in mainstream national media. So I guess I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you about your experience with this particular challenge of building pressure and working within that ecosystem on this particular issue, on the genocide in Gaza, when unfortunately so many in the media appear reluctant to pick up the story or even report on them in bad faith.
Mhm. Yeah, it is a challenge, and you're right. Like there is a role for social media on this 100%. But we know the challenges of social media as well, and we also
Yeah.
know that social media does not come without some pretty strong negatives as well.
Yeah.
Um, and and frankly, I mean, the reason that we need journalists covering these stories is because there are journalistic principles.
Yeah.
There is the need to tell truth and to provide a balanced story. Now, obviously, I have my opinion on which journalists are better at providing a balanced opinion
It's
than
okay. I do
others, but
too.
and perhaps some journalists need to go back to school to learn a little bit more about those journalistic principles. But that said, I do think that it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing, right? Because
Yeah.
you want the media is important to make sure that stories are being told so Canadians know what's happening. But I also think media often follows what Canadians are demanding to get information about. So, there is a little bit of a back and forth, and I do think that there is a switch right now. It's one thing, prior to October 7th, I think you would have heard most Canadians that don't know very much about the Middle East saying, "This is complicated. I don't want to. I don't have an opinion. It's too difficult. It's too complicated. It seems like it's always happening. It's not really something that I'm invested in." And then progressively since October 7th, when you've seen the very disproportionate response, like October 7th was horrible. It was a horrendous terrorist attack. I have children that go to music festivals. Like my heart it breaks for the families that had to endure October 7th and that continue to endure. Um, but that disproportionate response by Netanyahu is I think what has slowly changed so that people are paying more attention, and so I think that has meant that the media has to pay more attention, and then now with famine being used as a weapon of war, you know, I don't think there's very many people in this country that can stand to see children starve to death and not feel horrified, um, because no child is Hamas. No
Yeah.
child is a terrorist, and everyone has a child in their life that if you have any humanity at all, you can't help but look at, you know, the children in your life and not see them reflected on the faces of children that are in Gaza. So I do think in the last few months we've even seen a change in the way that the media is covering it because
Yeah.
it has become it's just become so horrific.
Yeah, and I do think that that's something one thing that I hear a lot from the public is, but what can we do? What can we do? And I honestly think that people, because change in many ways is kind of, it's like a crab in boiling water in some ways. And
Hmm.
you don't necessarily recognize the gains that you're making because they can be so incremental. But when the public raises their voices, it not only puts pressure on government, but it does put pressure on media to tell these stories. I mean, it reaches a point where it's nothing short of egregious that they are ignoring an issue or framing an issue a certain way. And they're forced to, this is a tactic that actually has been mobilized by bad faith actors too, to recognize the power of public pressure and speaking out to reframe issues in bad ways. But this is something that you, as an individual listening to this podcast, you have the power to do that by showing the world that you care about these stories. And then even the most craven politicians might advocate for change on these issues because they recognize that it is politically popular to do so, and the media will recognize that this is an issue that people want to hear about. So that is actually a huge power that people listening to this podcast do have.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, Rachel, because I always think about it as like Canada's obligations and then the laws and whatnot. But you're right. Like it's people writing to their MPs and calling their MPs and putting pressure on the government and saying not in our name.
Yeah. You can't assume every politician actually gives a shit too, which is sad. It's really sad. But sometimes that pressure works because there are people in power, unfortunately, who are more concerned about the politics of issues than the actual like morality of them. So
and every MP has to get reelected if they want to keep their job. They all have to get reelected. They all have to go back to Canadians at some point and say,
yeah. And that's how you can put the fear of God into them, people. So I did want to ask you a little bit about this issue internally with the NDP, because one thing that I think is important is to mention that like you personally have actually been clear on this issue for a long time. Like there are headlines to prove it. I Google your name with Palestine or with Gaza, and like you've been speaking out for a while. But the NDP broader movement, and feel free to take issue with this framing, but I'm going to present it, hasn't always been there with you. There was in Ontario, admittedly, that is the Ontario NDP, but they ejected Sarah Jama from their caucus for sort of breaking rank and calling for a ceasefire very early. And then this is an issue that actually went quite viral on TikTok. There was a content creator who had gone on Jagmeet Singh's campaign bus, who the NDP distanced itself from because she drew parallels between the dehumanization of kids in Palestine and the same dehumanization of Jewish children during the Holocaust. There was a statement put out by the party saying, "Oh, you can't compare anything to the Holocaust," and I just think that that's ridiculous. And it threw her under the bus. Like the National Post wrote this piece framing her as an OnlyFans star, and like it was just so salacious. And the way the NDP responded meant that nothing was done to mitigate those headlines, and she was crying on social media because she just wanted to help and was thrown under the bus. And I guess, and what's sad is that despite all of this, out of the federal parties, you guys are the strongest and the best on this issue. So it's like, I wanted to ask you what you make of those decisions by the broader movement and how you have held firm in your personal convictions, even if the broader movement hasn't always moved in lockstep with that.
Yeah. I mean, listen, political parties are big tent beasts, right? Like there's a lot of these things that happen within big parties. With regards to the Ontario NDP, I mean, I've always refused to comment on Sarah Jama just because I have no idea. I have no idea what went on there. I don't know. I don't know the players, so I don't want to interject. I don't see that as my role. It is a separate party. They do their own thing, so that's very, very separate from the work that I do. And I'm also always worried about having these conversations where we're talking about us instead of talking about the actual issues. I mean, people don't need to know, they don't need to see us fighting. They need to see us fighting for them. And that's always been a huge priority for me. In terms of the campaign, I mean, Rachel, like there's 7 of us now. There were so many mistakes made during that campaign. Like, let's be honest. Like this
would you say that's one of them?
I don't think it was great. and I think there were things that happened during the campaign that we didn't have any control over. This was a weird campaign. People have heard me say that before. I think people voted for things they didn't want rather than for things that they did want. And so I think there's some of what happened in this last election we need to take some ownership of, and we need to have some serious discussions with. We need to listen to people within our movement. Some of it we didn't have as much, the way that the election was, the question was Donald Trump, and people didn't see us as the answer to that. But I do think that the 7 of us that are in the NDP caucus, that are sitting around that table, every single one of them has been very vocal on this being a genocide and us needing to take steps and push the government. So, whether it is Leah Gazan, who is a Jewish Canadian, who has spoken out against the Netanyahu government, whether it's Don Davies, who has been doing this work for decades. I think Alex Boulerice, who's been an absolute champion been one of the co-chairs of the Palestine Friendship Association within Parliament. All of these folks, we are all working together to raise this issue and to make sure that the pressure on the government is not just coming from the foreign affairs critic, but coming from the entire caucus.
That's helpful to know, because I think that I can imagine it's frustrating to, speak about internal party issues when there are such bigger problems. But the difficulty is that those internal issues can impact the handling of these conversations publicly, which can have ramifications for the handling of those issues, right? So
mean, I'm really proud. I was proud of our caucus in the last parliament as well.
Yeah.
This is a difficult issue, and it is
It is.
very complicated and very hard to have some of these conversations because people are feeling extraordinarily like it's just so painful for so many people. We do see that there is a huge increase in anti-Palestinian racism, in Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism across this country. The targeting of Jewish folks because of what Netanyahu is doing is horrendous, is horrific. So it is a really complicated conversation, and I was really proud of our caucus of having discipline and making sure that we were trying to stay as to find as much space in the conversation as we could for all perspectives, and to make sure that we were listening to people while adhering to international law, while following the testimony of experts.
Do you think there's anything that needs to change internally at the NDP or at the HQ for the National Party on the council? Because one thing that I found interesting was the letter that came out with the frustrations about how things have been handled internally lately, about the decision to select Don Davies, which did follow your constitution, but perhaps there were conversations wanted about potentially changing those how that works. I couldn't help but notice that the people who signed that letter, who have put their support behind Don Davies, were all the women of color in your caucus.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there's a conversation that needs to be had here, or something that needs to change here?
I think there always is conversations that need to happen. I mean, I think from my perspective, the Constitution was followed, and I was pleased to see Don selected. I think he's done some really great work for us. But I think those conversations always need to happen, and maybe we do need to look at our Constitution. The way the party structure works is that doesn't happen at caucus. Caucus is the legislative arm of the party, but the party is a much bigger entity. The changes of our Constitution have to happen at a convention, and they have to happen with the membership and all of the sausage making that goes into that.
Right, yeah.
and those conversations, I think, do need to happen. They happen all the time, and they happen at each convention. I mean, it is why conventions are like the mayhem that they often
are. A mess. I've covered them before, and
and frankly, like, conservatives don't allow that sort of stuff to happen at their convention. Even the liberals, they do all of their sausage making behind closed doors. And New Democrats are open, and we do talk about this stuff in public. And that's not always super tidy, and sometimes it's messy. And maybe we do need to have conversations on what that process looks like. We have historically had different processes for how leaders get chosen, interim leaders get chosen. And of course, I think those conversations need to happen all the time. We need to be talking to each other. We're a caucus of 7 as well right now, so we
Yeah.
do have to be working together because New Democrats across this country need us. They need us to rebuild this party. And, it's not even New Democrats. Like, come on. None of us want a US style two-party political system. That's not good for Canada. That's not good for our
It's not good for
policies,
anyone.
no, like we
Yeah.
need a strong New Democratic Party. And you can say the Bloc plays a role as another party, but come on, they're not even they're
They're
not
only in
they're not
Quebec.
they're not
Yeah.
even
So,
running candidates in most
yeah.
of the country. So we've got to work together because we've got to rebuild for our democracy, for Canadians, for the best things that Canadians get is when we have a minority liberal government and the NDP make the liberals do the things they promised to do. Like that's how we got healthcare in the first place. That's how we've got expansions of healthcare, anti-scab legislation, supports for workers. All of those things happen because liberals are great at promising. This is my partisan spiel, but liberals are great at promising things. They're not always super freaking great at actually following through on it, right?
Yeah.
They promised pharmacare for 40 years before we forced them to do it last parliament.
Yeah. That sounded very leaderly, Heather. Are you you want to give me the scoop? Are you considering a run?
I'm getting asked a lot. I've
I
got a lot of
know.
people that are putting a lot of
By the media too.
a
I
lot
just
of
had to
pressure
throw it
on
at
me.
you.
What I have said to my team, what I have said to folks that ask is that we got to get through the first week of Parliament. This session is tricky. We're trying to figure out what it looks like to be members of Parliament, to try to find those tools like we talked about earlier to raise our voice and make sure that we're being heard at the same time that we're rebuilding our party, at the same time um, that we don't have the resources that we've had in the past. I mean, that's my focus right now. We don't have a leadership race yet. There is no timeline. There is no none of the sort of parameters have been decided. So I need to know that before I make any decisions.
That is a very fair
I am
answer.
not ruling it out.
Ooh, there you go. There's the quote, folks. Okay, Heather, I know that I've already been super greedy with your time, but I just want to throw you one last question because we just did all of the
It's always the
sausage
one
making
last question
stuff,
that's
and
a tough
I
one.
know it's honestly it's kind of I just want to end on a bit of a hopeful note for people. Honestly, like I think that sometimes people look at our government and they feel so small and they see our politicians and they hear about these huge issues like the genocide in Gaza and worry that they're not being heard, that their voices aren't being heard, or feel that advocacy might be futile. Especially people who are maybe new to the space, right? And like are wanting to make a difference, but feeling so uncertain about how. As someone who is on that side of the equation, who is sitting in Parliament, what is one thing that you wish the public knew about how their advocacy impacts government?
I mean, it's so vital. It's so important, and I don't just say that to make people feel like that's something they can do. It is literally the only thing that citizens can do outside of an election to change the direction that their government takes. And there are so many options to do it. I mean, yeah, there's the easy is the wrong word, but yeah, you can write a letter, you can send an email. All of those things are recorded. Like they don't go into some trash can in the sky. Like they are recorded. The minister will know every single email they get. They may not read them all, but their staff will say, we've now received 300,000 emails on this issue. We got to come up with a response. We got to deal with this. This is something that's because the other thing is, I would say, like every politician knows that every email they get, every letter they get, that's got to represent like 25 to 100 Canadians that think the same thing that haven't taken the time to write the letter. So absolutely. But even working with other organizations, like starting to mobilize, finding folks that also think the thing that you think, that want to make the change that you want to make, and working with them, like that's a key role. Um, there's lots of tools. I mean, there's petitions, there's order paper questions, there's meetings with your MP, there's all kinds of things that you can actually do. but when you start mobilizing and bringing together other folks, so that you're learning more about the issues that you're trying to affect change on, that you're coming up with concrete things that the government can do on those things. A clear ask is always better. You want an arms embargo? Ask for an arms embargo. Tell the government what that means. Tell them what you don't want them or do want them to do immediately. Those things make all the difference. Like, they really do. And members of parliament, like, nobody should ever feel like a member of parliament is unapproachable, or like, it always makes me laugh. When I was first elected as an MP, I had all kinds of imposter syndrome. You walk into this big chamber and you've got your green, like, velvet seat, and I just thought, oh my God, like, what am I doing here? I don't have the right to be here. I'm not, I'm not smart enough or a good enough orator or whatever else. And
Sorry,
and
just
you don't have to
having
be there very long
scrubbed
before
some
you
MPs.
realize.
Don't have imposter syndrome.
But yeah, like, that's what I was going to say. Like, you don't have to be there very long before you realize, oh no, like, this is the House of Commons for a reason. This is representative of the people that live in this country, and every single person in that place should be doing everything they can to represent their constituents. That's their only reason for being there. That's their only job.
Yeah. You hear that, folks? Your voice matters. So I know it's so corny, but it's real.
Use it.
Yeah. Heather, thank you so much for your time today. I don't know if there's anything we didn't get a chance to touch on that you wanted to mention, or if you feel like we kind of covered most of the topics.
My God. We could go forever,
so
right? Because I'm an Albertan MP. So when you want to talk about separatism, when you want to talk about some of the nonsense coming out of Danielle Smith with, like, book banning and all the rest of it, you just invite me back. I'd be more than happy to share my thoughts, because we'll
have to do it another time. That's the problem. Is, like, there's so many issues that actually matter, and it's like, and then I have to waste like 2 questions asking about the internal politics so that I don't get skewered. But anyways, so I guess if anyone wants to keep up with you, to watch your work on this stuff, other than on the CPAC YouTube channel, where can they keep up with you, Heather?
I mean, we try to get everything up on social media. We have a YouTube channel. We try to get everything up there. Folks can sign up for my email newsletter. I try to send out as much information as I can during that. We do have a Substack that I'm just sort of learning how to use. I'm not quite a pro there. So yeah, so I try to do what I can to make sure people can reach out, but of course they can always write emails to me as well. I mean, you don't have to be my constituent for me to take that information and hear from people.
Great. Heather, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was really fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Bubble Pop. I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing to Bubble Pop on YouTube, Patreon, Substack, and wherever you like to listen. You can also find me on TikTok, Instagram, Twitch, and Blue Sky. I'd like to say a special thank you to Hans Vivian Wenzel for creating the incredibly groovy music for Bubble Pop. You can find more of his stuff on Spotify under the artist name Hans. That's a lowercase h with an exclamation mark. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for spending this time with me. I would not be able to have this platform to elevate these kinds of stories if you didn't give it to me. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.